A 17-year-old kid is locked inside his grandmother's house on the south side of Chicago. He is on house arrest. He cannot leave. He has a gun charge on his record. He has a gang affiliation that law enforcement has already flagged. He has a $50,000 bounty on his head, placed there by a rival gang that wants him dead. The FBI has opened a file on him. He is, by every definition the United States government uses, a high-risk individual living inside one of the most dangerous situations a teenager can be in anywhere in this country. So he grabs a phone, points it at himself, records a song called I Don't Like, and posts it to YouTube. No budget, no studio, no label, no manager, no publicist. Just a teenager, a beat, and the raw, unfiltered rage of growing up in a zip code where people die over corners and Twitter arguments. And that video, shot in a living room with a dozen shirtless teenagers turning up in the background with zero production value and maximum authenticity, starts getting views, then more views. Then Kanye West calls. Within weeks of Kanye remixing that record with Pusha T, Jadakiss, and Big Sean, every major record label in the music business is circling this 17-year-old child like sharks that just smelled blood in the water. Interscope Records, the same label that built its empire off Dr. Dre, Eminem, 50 Cent, and Tupac Shakur, wins the bidding war. They signed Chief Keef to a deal that court documents later reveal is worth up to $6 million over 3 albums. $6 million for a teenager who is still on house arrest. A teenager who is still actively involved in gang life on the south side of Chicago. A teenager who, and this is not speculation or rumor, this is something the Interscope A&R executive who signed him said himself in an interview years later, so was on an active FBI watch list at the time the contract was signed. A teenager with a $50,000 hit out on him from a rival faction. The A&R executive who made that signing happen is a man named Larry Jackson. He later went on to become the CEO of a music company called Gamma, and in a 2024 interview with NPR, Jackson said, and I'm quoting this directly because the words matter, "This is the first time I'm telling this story, but I was getting a call from a friend of mine who was in touch with the FBI, who told me that this kid was on a watch list. Then also called me back and told me there is a $50,000 hit out on this kid. You may want to do something about it." And what did Larry Jackson do about it? He signed Chief Keef to a $6 million record deal. He wrote a letter to the judge on Keef's probation case trying to keep him out of jail. He described it as taking on a father figure role. And maybe there was genuine care there on a personal level. I'm not here to say the man had no humanity, but I am here to say that the decision to sign a teenager who is on an FBI watch list, who has a gang bounty on his head, who is still on house arrest for a gun charge, who is still actively embedded in one of the most dangerous gang conflicts on the south side of Chicago. That decision was not made out of fatherly love. That decision was made because the danger was the product. The violence was the brand. The FBI watch list was not a warning, it was a marketing brief. And that is what this entire story is about. Not just Chief Keef, not just one deal. The full picture, because what happened with Chief Keef was not a one-time thing. It was the blueprint. It was the template that got run over and over and over again across an entire decade of Chicago drill music, a genre that gave the world some of the most influential rap music of the 21st century, that launched careers, that changed the sound of hip-hop globally, that generated billions of dollars in streaming revenue and record sales and merchandise and concert tickets. And the young black men from the south side of Chicago who built that genre, who lived it, who bled for it, who died for it, were the least protected people in the entire operation. They were the product. They were not the partners. And the men and women who sat in corner offices in Los Angeles and New York, who collected the masters and the publishing deals and the distribution percentages, who attended the Grammys and the listening parties, who posed for photos with these rappers on their Instagram pages, those people are the bosses nobody talks about. We're talking about them today. Over the next 20 minutes, I'm going to take you through the full story. How drill started, what the streets of Chicago actually looked like when this music was born, how the labels moved in, what the contracts actually said, because they're public record, they're in court documents, anyone can read them. What happened to the artists who signed those contracts? what happened when those artists started dying, what the labels did with the grief, and then the lawsuit, the one filed in October 2024 that, for the first time in the history of the music industry, directly named Sony Music, Universal Music Group, Interscope Records, Alamo Records, and Empire Distribution as defendants in a wrongful death case connected to a murdered rapper. A lawsuit that accused these corporations of knowingly financing, promoting, and profiting from a criminal enterprise that ended a man's life. The evidence is not hidden. The receipts are in court filings. The executives have given interviews. The contracts are public. The reason this story doesn't get told is that everybody in the supply chain gets paid enough to stay quiet. But the people who can't stay quiet anymore are the mothers. And when a mother stands in front of a courthouse in Chicago and says her son died because these corporations chose profit over his life, that's a story that deserves to be told from beginning to end. No cap. Stay locked in. Before we get into the label executives in their West Coast offices making millions off the misery of the South Side, we need to spend a few minutes understanding exactly what was happening on the ground in Chicago. Because to understand the exploitation fully, you first have to understand why these young men were so vulnerable to it. You have to understand what they were walking out of and what they were walking into. The South Side of Chicago in the early 2000s was a war zone. Not metaphorically, literally. The city of Chicago recorded more homicides in 2012 than the total number of American troops killed in Afghanistan that same year. Let that land. More people were killed inside city limits, on the streets where these rappers were growing up, than in an active combat theater abroad. The Chicago Sun-Times named Parkway Gardens, the housing complex on the South Side that the rap world would come to know as O Block, the most dangerous block in the entire city of Chicago. This was the block where King Von grew up, the block where the O Block faction of the Black Disciples operated, the block that became one of the most referenced addresses in all of drill rap, and eventually one of the most profitable brand names on any streaming platform. As this music scene was building momentum and gaining national attention, the city of Chicago was experiencing a 38% spike in homicides, driven almost entirely by gang violence concentrated in those South Side and West Side neighborhoods. The violence wasn't abstract, it was hyper-local, block by block, faction by faction. And this is a critical detail that most people who talk about Chicago drill music from the outside don't fully understand. The old school structure of Chicago's gangs had largely collapsed by this point. The gangster disciples and the black disciples that people knew from the 1980s and 1990s, those monolithic organizations with their hierarchies and their rules and their codes about what you could and couldn't do, they had fractured into dozens of smaller factions, some with memberships as small as 15 or 20 people, each controlling a few blocks, each with their own beefs, their own social media pages, their own diss tracks. This fragmentation made the violence more chaotic and less predictable, and it made the music more personal. When a drill rapper named a specific block, dissed a specific person, referenced a specific event, it wasn't fiction, it was documentation. And the people being referenced were real people who were going to respond in real ways. The music wasn't separate from the street life. The music was the street life, compressed into a track, posted to YouTube, and sent directly to the people it was aimed at. And this is where the story of exploitation begins, because the labels didn't come to Chicago because they wanted to help these young men express themselves. They came because those YouTube views were off the charts. They came because the internet had made this content globally accessible, and the global appetite for authentic street reality, for what scholars have called poverty voyeurism, was enormous. People all over the world sitting in safe homes in countries these rappers had never heard of were clicking on videos of teenagers in Englewood flashing guns and dissing their rivals. And every click was a data point, and every data point told the labels the same thing. This is commercial. This is sellable. Go get it. So they went and got it. And here's what really went down. Let's rewind to 2011. A 15-year-old Keith Cozart, who the world will come to know as Chief Keef, is living with his grandmother, Margaret Carter, in the Woodlawn neighborhood on Chicago's South Side. He's already caught a gun charge. He's affiliated with a set of the Black Disciples called Lamron, named because it's normal spelled backwards, after Normal Avenue, the street where the gang operated. He starts making music, raw, stripped down, nothing polished about any of it. Just him rapping over beats, filming himself and his crew in apartments, hallways, parking lots, streets. He posts it to YouTube, and the views start coming. Now here is something that almost never gets discussed when people talk about the rise of Chicago drill. These young men were not accidental viral stars. They were genuinely sophisticated in how they understood the internet and how to use it. Media scholar Jabari M. Evans, who grew up in Chicago, is a rapper himself and has written an entire book examining the drill movement, argues that Chicago's drill artists understood virality and digital platforms in ways the mainstream music industry had not yet figured out. They understood that authenticity was the currency of the internet before authenticity became a buzzword in any marketing department. They understood that if you made the content real enough, if the line between performance and reality was blurred enough that viewers couldn't tell where the rap ended and the street life began, the algorithm would reward you. They were hacking the algorithm before that phrase existed. But here is the brutal irony at the center of this story. The thing that made the content authentic, the gang affiliations, the live beefs, the guns in the videos, the diss tracks directed at actual rivals, was also the thing that was putting these kids in physical danger every single day. The authenticity that was generating those millions of YouTube views was not a performance. It was not theater. People were actually getting shot, and the labels that were about to come calling knew this. They knew it before they wrote the first check. In the summer of 2012, Chief Keef's I Don't Like gets remixed by Kanye West. That remix launches Keef from a Southside YouTube phenomenon into a national conversation. A bidding war breaks out. Young Jeezy's CTE World is in the mix. Interscope wins. They sign Chief Keef, who is 16 years old, still on house arrest, still actively embedded in gang life, still a target in the street, to a contract that Cook County court filings would later detail extensively. The terms were this: Interscope paid a $440,000 advance, half up front, half after a judge approved the deal, which was required because Keef was a minor. In a separate deal to establish his label imprint, Glory Boys Entertainment, Interscope handed over another $440,000 advance. The total potential payout across all three albums was $6 million. A split of future royalties could make the number even higher, according to the court filings. But here is the clause that tells you everything you need to know about how this industry operates. If Keef's debut album, Finally Rich, failed to sell 250,000 copies by December 2013, Interscope had the contractual right to walk away entirely. The label had a built-in exit ramp. The kid had zero leverage once he signed. The $6 million was conditional. The risks, the gang beef, the probation violations, the FBI watch list, the bounty on his head, those were Keef's to carry. The upside was shared. The downside was all his. This is important because it establishes the fundamental structure of every deal that followed. The label extracted the value of the street credibility. The artist absorbed the risk of the street reality. They were not equal partners in any sense of the word. The ink on Chief Keef's Interscope contract was barely dry when the first catastrophic consequence of the authenticity sales model played out in real blood on a real street. September 4, 2012, an 18-year-old rapper named Joseph Coleman, who performed under the name Lil Jojo, was shot and killed while riding a bicycle in the Inglewood neighborhood on Chicago's South Side. Jojo was affiliated with a gangster disciples faction known as Brick Squad, and he had been in a very public, rapidly escalating beef with Chief Keef's crew. It had started months earlier with a diss track Jojo released in April called 300K, recorded over Chief Keef's own everyday beat featuring the acronym BDK, Black Disciple Killer, directed straight at Keef's gang affiliation. The video showed Jojo and his friends displaying guns. It was not subtle. Then a YouTube video surfaced of Jojo's car pulling alongside a vehicle carrying Lil Reese, one of Keef's closest affiliates, with the two sides screaming at each other through their windows. On that video, someone from Reese's side says clearly, "I'ma kill you." The video went viral across Chicago. The police, who had been monitoring the drill scene's social media activity intensively, were watching all of this in real time. They warned publicly that this beef was going to end in bloodshed. On September 4, 2012, hours after Jojo tweeted his own location and posted a video of himself and his crew taunting Keef's faction in their own neighborhood, Lil Jojo was shot in the back. He died at the University of Chicago Medical Center. He was 18 years old. No one has ever been charged in his murder. The case remains open. What happened in the hours after Jojo's death is one of the most revealing moments in the entire history of this story, because it shows you exactly how the machine processed a teenager's death. Chief Keef, who was already signed to Interscope Records, already being managed by professional industry people, posted a tweet that read, "Ha ha 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 ha. It's sad cuz Jojo wanted to be just like us, #LMAO. hours after an 18-year-old was shot in the back on a bicycle. He later claimed the account had been hacked. Chicago police opened an investigation. Federal prosecutors noted the tweet, and Interscope Records, a corporation whose legal and compliance teams had already been through the entire background of this 17-year-old artist before signing him, said nothing, issued no statement, paused no promotions, suspended no rollout, proved that Chief Keef was not performing a character. He was the character. And in the economics of drill rap in 2012, that was not a crisis. That was confirmation of the investment. According to Chicago Magazine's extensive reporting from inside the drill scene during that period, rappers and their crews understood this dynamic explicitly and were operating according to it deliberately. The thinking was calculated. If a video pulled enough views, record labels would call. Crews would time video releases to coincide with acts of violence so that the rap appeared to be directly connected to street activity, giving the content more credibility. The music and the gang activity were not separate things that happened to overlap. They were deliberately intertwined for maximum commercial impact, and the labels benefited from every bit of that intertwining without bearing any of its consequences. Now here's what the label did once the album didn't perform. Finally, Rich moved roughly 50,000 copies in its first week, a fraction of the 250,000 copy threshold built into the contract. By October 2014, Interscope exercised their contractual right and dropped Chief Keef entirely. Bang 3, the album that had been announced, that fans were waiting for, never materialized. The label that had written letters to judges and positioned itself as a lifeline for this teenager had gotten what it needed from him and walked away clean. No accountability, no obligation. The experiment was over. Chief Keef relocated to Los Angeles. He survived. Not everyone did. Meanwhile, the same summer that Chief Keef was getting dropped by Interscope, another young rapper associated with his GBE collective was shot and killed in Chicago. Mario Hess, who rapped under the name Blood Money, was killed on April 9, 2014, just days after appearing on a recording with Chief Keef. He was one of the youngest members of the extended Glow Gang family. He was gone before most people outside of Chicago had ever heard his name. There was no posthumous album for Blood Money. There was no label press release. There was nothing. Because the machine only activates for the artists who have already generated commercial value. If you die before you blow up, you're invisible. But here's where it gets real. The machine didn't stop after Interscope dropped Keef. It didn't pause. It didn't look at what had happened. The deaths, the gang escalations, the real-world consequences of promoting artists who were actively embedded in violent street conflicts and decide to do business differently. It just identified the next set of artists and started the process over. While Chief Keef was the face of the GBE movement, his older cousin Fredo Santana, born Derek Coleman, was the soul of it. And the story of what happened to Fredo Santana is, in many ways, the clearest and most painful illustration of how the music industry's exploitation machine chews through human beings and moves on without a second thought. Fredo came up alongside Keef, helping build the GBE brand from the ground up before there was any industry attention. Before any label money was involved, he appeared in the I Don't Like video. He was there in that living room in Woodlawn when this whole thing started. He dropped his debut mixtape, It's a Scary Sight, in 2012, featuring Chief Keef, Lil Durk, Lil Reese, and King L, and it announced him as a serious, fully formed voice in the drill world. His delivery was dark and menacing in a way that felt genuinely unnerving, not performed. He had the kind of presence that made people take the music seriously as more than just street documenting. He was an artist. When Interscope structured Chief Keef's GBE label deal, Fredo Santana was given a $40,000 advance and a 10% ownership stake in GBE. For context, Chief Keef and his manager each received 40%. Fredo, who had been building this movement from day one alongside Keef, who had been in the streets the same way, who had put in the same work establishing the brand, got 10% and a $40,000 check. His other GBE co-founders received the remaining percentages. That is what exploitation looks like. Not a dramatic villain moment, a legal document filed in a Cook County court that assigns a 10% cut to someone who helped build the foundation. The contract doesn't care about loyalty. The contract doesn't care about who was there first. The contract cares about leverage. And a teenager from the south side of Chicago with no music industry lawyer, no prior deal experience, and no negotiating power has none. Fredo kept going. He dropped Trappin' Ain't Dead in 2013, a solo studio album that featured a collaboration with Kendrick Lamar. He appeared in Drake's Hold On, We're Coming Home video, the biggest record Drake put out that year. He was making moves. By every measure of the culture, he was a star. He should have been building real wealth, but the deal structures of that era, the label advances recouped against royalties, the complex split arrangements, the 360 deals that took percentages of touring, merchandise, and endorsements, meant the money flowed upward and away from the artists. You got enough to look rich on Instagram. The people holding the contracts got rich for real, and the streets never stopped coming for Fredo. He carried the trauma of the South Side everywhere he went. He developed a serious dependency on lean, the codeine-based syrup that had become, by this point, almost as central to the drill aesthetic as the music itself. He was self-medicating, and nobody in his professional orbit, no label, no manager, no A&R executive positioning themselves as a father figure, provided him with the mental health resources or the medical support he needed. The industry wanted his music. They wanted his features. They wanted his brand. They did not want to pay for the treatment of a Southside rapper's untreated PTSD. In October 2017, Fredo posted a video from a hospital bed. Kidney failure, liver failure. He said he was getting better. He was back in the studio within days because the machine doesn't pause for illness. On January 20th, 2018, Fredo Santana was found dead at his home in Los Angeles. Fatal seizure. He was 27 years old. He had a baby who had been born not long before. He was, by all accounts from people close to him, in one of the better emotional spaces he'd been in for years. He had started a weed business in LA. He was building his own label imprint. He was trying to become the entrepreneur the streets of Chicago had never let him be. He was 27 years old. The music industry's response was immediate and exactly what you would expect. Streams spiked, publications ran tributes, artists posted RIPs, and as a GBE management team member said publicly in the days after Fredo's death, with a mixture of grief and bitterness, the first 2 weeks after an artist dies in this industry always look the same. The wave of attention, the spike in streams and sales, the tributes, the legend proclamations. And then, 2 weeks pass, and the machine settles back into its normal routine, looking for the next tragedy to capitalize on. Nobody in the corporate structure that had collected money from Fredo Santana's work ever sat in front of a camera and explained what they had done or failed to do for this man. Nobody was held responsible. Nobody lost a deal. Nobody lost a penny. The industry moved on. By the time Davon Bennett, King Von, entered the drill scene, the playbook had been running for almost a decade, and the labels had gotten better as it. Where Chief Keef was a raw explosion that the industry barely knew how to manage, King Von was a more developed, more narratively sophisticated artist. His storytelling ability, the way he could build an entire movie inside a 4-minute track, the way he put you inside a scene with specific details, specific dialogue, specific emotional stakes, was genuinely remarkable. Crazy Story and its sequels are not just drill records. They are some of the best narrative rap of the 2000s and 10s, full stop. His debut album, Welcome to O'Block, released in October 2020, debuted at number 5 on the Billboard 200. He was 26 years old and ascending at a rate that suggested he was going to be one of the biggest rappers in the world. But King Von was also, by this point, a deeply documented figure in Chicago law enforcement's records. According to Chicago Police Department documents unsealed in 2021, Von had been questioned as a person of interest in the 2014 shooting death of 17-year-old Gakira Barnes. He had been charged with first-degree murder in 2017 in connection with a shooting in Englewood, charges he was ultimately found not guilty on in December of that year. He and Lil Durk were arrested together in connection with a 2019 shooting in Atlanta. He was, by the time he was signed and distributed, a man whose legal history was extensively documented and publicly available. He was signed to Lil Durk's Only the Family label with distribution through Empire Distribution. Empire had built its entire business model around signing and distributing artists that the major labels considered too legally complicated or too street-affiliated to touch directly. Empire would offer more favorable splits, faster deal turnaround, more creative independence. It was a better deal for artists than what Interscope had offered Keef. But Empire still collected its distribution percentage. Empire still benefited from the violent branding. Empire still made money on every stream, every album sale, every playlist placement. And when things went wrong, when the beef stopped being content and became actual violence, Empire was not the one who answered for it. The beef between King Von's O'Block faction and rapper FBG Duck born Carlton Weekly, had been building for years. It was rooted in the same Black Disciples versus Gangster Disciples conflict that had defined the South Side for decades, now playing out through diss tracks and Instagram posts and Twitter beefs. Duck was affiliated with a Gangster Disciples faction called Tookaville. Von was O-Block Black Disciples. They had been trading shots in music for years. Von's song "Took Her to the O" was widely read as a direct taunt aimed at Duck. And in July 2020, Duck released a song called "Dead Bitch" that explicitly referenced deceased O-Block members. According to federal prosecutors, this escalation led King Von to place a $100,000 bounty on FBG Duck's life. August 4, 2020. FBG Duck is in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood, one of the wealthiest retail strips in the entire city, lined with luxury stores. He's outside Dolce & Gabbana buying a gift for his son. In broad daylight, a group of masked men arrive and open fire. Duck is shot multiple times. His girlfriend and a bystander are also hit. FBG Duck was alive on that sidewalk for more than 17 minutes. 17 minutes before he received any medical treatment. 17 minutes where the police who arrived did not ensure he got emergency care, where the security firms for the surrounding stores did nothing. He died from his wounds. He was 26 years old. 6 men were convicted by a federal jury in January 2024 for the murder, identified as members of the O-Block faction: Charles Liggins, Kenneth Robertson, Christopher Thomas, Marcus Smart, Carlos Offord, and Ralph Turpin. All 6 were convicted of murder in aid of racketeering and conspiracy. 3 months after FBG Duck was murdered, King Von was shot and killed outside a nightclub in Atlanta on November 6, 2020. He was 26 years old. The commercial response to Von's death was immediate and enormous. Lil Durk released an album in December 2020, just 1 month after Von died, called The Voice, with Von prominently featured on the cover as a tribute. Von's manager announced in February 2021 that the rapper had left behind over 300 unreleased songs, approximately 10 albums worth of material, which would continue to be released to honor his legacy. In March 2022, the first posthumous album, What It Means to Be King, was released through Empire Distribution and OTF. It debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200. In July 2023, a second posthumous album, Grandson, was released and peaked at number 14. More releases were in planning stages as of 2025. Financial analysts tracking his estate estimate that King Von's value, which was approximately $750,000 at the time of his death, has grown to somewhere between $3 and $4 million, driven entirely by posthumous revenue. Let that sink in. King Von was worth more commercially as a dead man than he was as a living artist. His streams increased after he was murdered. His albums charted higher posthumously than his debut did when he was alive and promoting it. The tragedy generated more commercial momentum than the talent alone had, and everyone in the distribution chain, Empire, OTF, Lil Durk's management structures, the streaming platforms, collected on every one of those streams. Then came October 9th, 2024. The Dinizulu Law Group filed a civil lawsuit in Cook County Circuit Court on behalf of FBG Duck's mother, Lashina Weekly, and 2 bystanders. And the list of defendants was unlike anything the music industry had seen before. The lawsuit named Lil Durk personally, the estate of King Von, Only the Family Entertainment, OTF, and then the corporations, Alamo Records, Sony Music Entertainment Inc., Universal Music Group Recordings Inc., which is the parent company of Interscope Records, Empire Distribution Inc., Sony, Universal, the 2 largest music companies on the planet, both named in a wrongful death lawsuit connected to the murder of a Chicago rapper. At the news conference announcing the filing, attorney Roosevelt Allen III stood in front of cameras in the loop and said this: "Without a doubt, Lil Durk, OTF, King Von, O-Block, a criminal organization, could never have achieved the international fame and become so emboldened to kill a rival musician without the promotion, distribution, and financial support provided to them by these record companies." The lawsuit stated directly that these corporations knew of the criminal histories and the bodies associated with the conduct of OTF. It alleged they created profit and made business decisions to act in an extension of a criminal enterprise. And it contained a sentence that should be read by everyone who has ever streamed a drill record. They understood that reality rap, violence, controversy, beefs, and notoriety were good for driving increased record sales, streams, and views, for building a brand and profiting from a violent image. They understood. That is not an accusation. That is a description of a business strategy. a documented, deliberate, profit-maximizing business strategy that treated real gang violence and real human death as a component of a commercial product. Another attorney on the case, Roland A. Edwards, said this: "Our laws do not allow a company to put out a dangerous, defective product that can harm our community. These labels, UMG/Interscope, Sony/Alamo Records, Empire Distribution, put a dangerous product of Lil Durk, King Von, and OTF out to the public, and the end result was the death and injuries of our clients. They are responsible for their product." The lawsuit further alleged that after FBG Duck was murdered, Lil Durk, OTF, and King Von's associates used the killing on social media and streaming platforms to grow their brand, and that the labels profited from that brand growth. The attorneys summarized it simply. In essence, they monetized the killing of FBG Duck. Monetized the killing. Read that sentence again. Sit with it. Now, somebody watching this might say, that's one lawsuit, one situation, one bad outcome in a complicated industry. So let's talk about what the insiders have been saying, because it's not just lawyers and grieving mothers who have been sounding the alarm about this. It's the artists themselves. It's the veterans of the industry. It's the people who know exactly how this machine works because they've been inside it. French Montana, in an interview on DJ Academic's Off the Record podcast, said something that the entire industry heard, briefly discussed, and then collectively decided to move past. He said that record labels are now taking out life insurance policies on their drill artists, not on their pop stars, not on their legacy acts, on their drill artists, because the labels understand, and this is not speculation, this is the logic of the financial instrument they're purchasing, that there is a meaningful probability that these artists will die, and when they do, the label collects the insurance payout while simultaneously collecting the spike in streaming revenue from the posthumous grief wave. French Montana said it plainly: the labels are preying off of death and making millions doing it. At least back then, we ain't have that, he said, comparing it to the 1990s era of East Coast, West Coast beefs. Back then, labels profited from the feuds. Yes, the Biggie and Tupac beef is the most infamous example of the industry fanning flames for commercial gain, but at least they weren't taking out insurance policies betting on the death outcomes. The financial infrastructure of exploitation has gotten more sophisticated, more deliberate, more insulated from consequences. Jadakiss on the I Am Athlete podcast was even more blunt about the structural mechanics of the problem. He said, "Record labels are being successful off nonsense. Somebody went out, did something stupid, recorded a song about it, and was able to get a lot of streams, and that became a thing with the whole drill scene. They actually going out, getting active and doing stuff, and then go into the studio and make a song about what they just did. That should get nipped in the bud as soon as it got created, but nobody's going to these labels saying they wrong for this. We just blaming it on the kids. So my brother said he don't like to just put all the blame on these young artists because the radio stations are making them the top songs of the playlist." Jadakiss is naming the entire supply chain, not just the labels, the radio stations too, the playlist curators, the streaming algorithm designers, the media outlets that cover the beefs and the shootings and the arrests and the court cases, generating click traffic off the drama while contributing to the narrative that validates the commercial value of the artist's street credibility. Every single node in that supply chain is extracting value from the violence, and every single one of them, when something goes wrong, points at the kid from the South Side and says, he chose this life. Lupe Fiasco, a Chicago rapper from an earlier generation who watched the drill movement explode from close range, said at a Harvard panel on drill music, "People around the country are dancing. Dope. I'm thinking, you all dancing on graves. People are dying." That was his response to watching the same streets he grew up near being turned into content for global consumption. Dancing on graves. That's not hyperbole. That is an accurate description of what the streaming economy did to the death toll on the south side of Chicago. And D1, a New Orleans rapper who spoke at the same Harvard panel, called out media outlets specifically, noting that music publication Pitchfork published an article titled "The Exploitation of New York Drill Hits a Disturbing New Low," while simultaneously ranking the top 11 songs that defined Chicago drill. The same publication condemning exploitation in one city while celebrating the content of the same exploitation in another, because the content is commercially valuable, and commercial value makes hypocrisy invisible. Let's build out the full picture of of how this machine is actually structured, because understanding the architecture is the only way to understand why nobody at the corporate level ever gets held accountable. At the top of the food chain, the major labels. Universal Music Group, the parent company of Interscope Records, Republic Records, and dozens of others. Sony Music Entertainment. These are publicly traded corporations. They have shareholders, compliance departments, legal teams the size of small law firms. When a drill rapper gets killed, UMG does not issue a statement about the violence. Their subsidiary's distribution partner handled that artist. There are 4 layers of corporate abstraction between the executive suite and the street, and that abstraction is deliberate. It is not an accident of corporate structure, it is a design feature. Because the further the distance between the executive signing the distribution check and the artist catching a bullet, the harder it is for any court, any journalist, or any grieving mother to draw a straight line between the two. UMG doesn't sign drill rappers directly. They own the label that owns the imprint that has the distribution deal with the company that signed the rapper. By the time you trace the money back to the top, most people have given up. That's the point. The architecture of the machine is also the architecture of its immunity. Below the majors, the mid-tier labels and distribution companies. Empire Distribution, founded by Ghazi Shami in San Francisco in 2010, built its value proposition specifically around being the label that would sign artists the majors wouldn't touch. Artists with criminal records, artists with open cases, artists whose entire brand was built on gang affiliation and street authenticity. Empire offered better royalty splits than a traditional major label deal. Some artists reported receiving 50% or more of their streaming revenue, compared to the 15 to 25% offered by majors. That made Empire genuinely attractive to artists like King Von, who had options but wanted to maintain more ownership and more independence. But Empire still collected its percentage. Empire still built its business on the commercial value of that street authenticity. And when FBG Duck's mother filed her lawsuit, Empire Distribution was named as a defendant, accused alongside Sony and UMG of financing and profiting from what the lawsuit described as a criminal enterprise. Below that, the artist-run label imprints, OTF, Only the Family, GBE, Glory Boys Entertainment, later Glow Gang. These are the labels that rappers like Lil Durk and Chief Keef got to put their names on as part of their deals. They provide the illusion of ownership and autonomy, but they are contractually subordinate to their distribution and label partners in almost every meaningful way. When Interscope structured GBE as part of Keef's deal, the contract specified that GBE and Interscope split profits equally, but Interscope could terminate the arrangement if losses exceeded $4.5 million. That's not a partnership. That's a franchise arrangement with an escape hatch for the franchisor. The artist-run imprint holds the street credibility and absorbs the street risk. The corporate partner holds the financial leverage and retains the exit option. And then at the foundation of this entire pyramid, the artists themselves, teenagers, young men from neighborhoods where the average household income was sometimes less than $15,000 per year. Men who had never had a lawyer look at a contract on their behalf. Men who were being offered more money in a single advance check than their entire family had ever seen. Money that came attached to a document they didn't fully understand, negotiated by lawyers they didn't choose, structured to benefit the party with the leverage, not the party with the talent. And here is something that almost never gets said. These young men were not naive. They were not stupid. They knew on some level that the deal wasn't fair. They knew the label was getting more than they were. But when you have grown up in a neighborhood where the alternative to taking that check is going back to the block, the choice isn't really a choice. When you have watched people you grew up with get shot, get locked up, or disappear into dead-end jobs, a bad record deal still looks like a way out. The labels understood this, they counted on it. The desperation of the artists was a negotiating advantage, and the corporations used it deliberately and without apology. The 360 deal, which became the standard format for signing young drill artists during this era, meant the label collected a percentage of virtually every revenue stream the artist generated. Music sales, streaming, touring, merchandise, brand deals, endorsements, appearances. In exchange, the label provided the advance, the marketing infrastructure, the distribution network. The advance sounded enormous to a kid from the South Side, but the advance was recouped against the artist's royalty share, meaning until the artist generated enough streaming revenue at their royalty rate to pay back every dollar the label advanced, the artist saw nothing additional from the label. Given that label royalty rates for new artists typically ran between 15 and 25% of streaming revenue, while the label kept the remainder, recoupment could take years. For many artists, it never happened at all. They stayed technically in debt to the label their entire career, never seeing meaningful royalty checks, while the label collected the majority of the revenue their music generated. So the structure created this. The artist needed to keep generating content to service the advanced debt. The content that performed best was the most authentic, the most dangerous, the most directly connected to the street reality. The label's incentive structure, through the debt mechanism of the advance system, pushed the artist back toward the streets they were trying to escape. Not with a phone call, not with an explicit instruction, with a financial architecture that made staying dangerous the most rational economic choice. This is not a conspiracy theory, this is contract law. This is how the deals were written. And you can read those deals, or at least portions of them, because Chief Keef's deal was filed in Cook County Court because he was a minor. The documents are public, the mechanics are visible, the exploitation is not hidden, it's just never talked about loudly enough for long enough to change anything. So where does this all leave us in 2026? What has actually changed, if anything, because of all of this? On the legal front, the FBG Duck civil lawsuit against Lil Durk, OTF, Sony, UMG/Interscope, Alamo Records, and Empire Distribution is still working its way through the courts. This case is historically significant in a way that goes far beyond FBG Duck's individual tragedy. For the first time in the history of the American music industry, a legal argument is being made in a court of law with documented evidence that major record corporations bear direct legal liability for the real-world consequences of the violent content they knowingly promoted and distributed. If that argument succeeds, it changes the entire calculus of how labels assess the risk of signing street-affiliated artists. It forces them to weigh not just commercial upside, but genuine legal exposure. It means the abstraction of corporate distance, the 4 layers of subsidiaries and distribution agreements that currently insulate UMG executives from any accountability for what happens on a Chicago street might not be enough protection anymore. That would be a seismic shift. It hasn't happened yet, but the lawsuit has been filed. The argument is being made in open court, and that is further than this conversation has ever gotten before. On the cultural front, the legacy of Chicago's drill scene is permanent and enormous. Without Chief Keef, there is no Travis Scott, who has cited Keef's influence explicitly and whose melodic, genre-blending approach to rap is a direct descendant of the Glow Gang aesthetic. Without Fredo Santana, there is no 21 Savage, no Lil Uzi Vert, no Playboi Carti, artists who have all named Fredo as a foundational influence on their delivery, their lingo, their visual aesthetic. Without King Von, the entire tradition of narrative street storytelling and drill rap, the specific, cinematic, character-driven approach to lyricism, loses one of its most gifted practitioners. Without the Chicago drill movement as a whole, modern hip-hop looks completely different. The cultural contribution is not in question. It is enormous. It is permanent. And that permanence is precisely what makes the exploitation so damning. These young men built something that will last for generations, something that influenced global music culture from Seoul to London to Lagos. And the people who collected the most money from what they built were the people who took the least risk, suffered none of the consequences, and have never had to stand in front of a camera and account for what they knew and when they knew it. Let's count the human cost one more time. Not as statistics, as people. Lil Jojo, Joseph Coleman, dead at 18, shot in the back on a bicycle in Englewood on September 4th, 2012. His murder is unsolved. Nobody has ever been charged. The beef that got him killed was documented publicly on Twitter and YouTube in real time for anyone who was watching to see. Labels were watching, they were counting the views. Fredo Santana, Derek Coleman, dead at 27 from kidney and liver failure related to drug use that was itself a symptom of untreated trauma from a lifetime on the South Side. He died with a baby at home. He was trying to build a weed business. He had made records with Kendrick Lamar and Drake. He got a $40,000 check and a 10% stake in a label imprint. Nobody in the corporate infrastructure that profited from his talent ever provided him with the mental health resources that might have kept him alive. He died with a baby at home. He was trying to build a weed business. He had made records with Kendrick Lamar and Drake. He got a $40,000 check and a 10% stake in a label imprint. Nobody in the corporate infrastructure that profited from his talent ever provided him with the mental health resources that might have kept him alive. Lay Capone, Charles Richardson, dead at 17, shot outside a recording studio in 2013. He was still a child. He had appeared in a Vice documentary about the Chicago drill scene. He died before that documentary was even released. There was no label deal for Le Capone. There was just a body. FBG Duck, Carlton Weekly, dead at 26, murdered in broad daylight outside Dolce & Gabbana in Chicago's Gold Coast on August 4, 2020, left on the sidewalk for over 17 minutes. His mother is still fighting in court. She stood in front of cameras and said, "It has been a long and painful journey fighting for justice for my son. Not a day goes by that I don't think about him." King Von, Davon Bennett, dead at 26, shot outside a nightclub in Atlanta on November 6, 2020. 2 posthumous albums, a third in planning stages. His estate is now worth an estimated $3 to $4 million. His children receive royalties. That's something. It doesn't change what happened, but it's something. Today, Chief Keef operates independently out of Los Angeles, releasing music on his own terms through Glow Gang, largely free from the major label machine that used him and discarded him. He survived. He is one of the few artists from that original wave who navigated the machine, got burned by it, and rebuilt on the other side. His net worth is estimated at $2 to $4 million. For a man whose sound influenced billions of dollars in music industry revenue over more than a decade, that number should feel like an insult. The gap between the cultural value he created and the financial value he personally captured is a direct measurement of how the exploitation worked. Dollar by dollar, contract clause by contract clause. Today, Lil Durk, whatever the outcome of the FBG Duck civil case and his federal criminal proceedings, has achieved a level of commercial success that the industry is unlikely to walk away from. He won a Grammy Award in 2024 for All My Life. His music is on every major platform. His OTF label continues to operate. The corporations named in the lawsuit against him continue to distribute his music, collect their percentages, and generate their quarterly earnings. The machine is still running, even as the lawsuits pile up around it. Today, the streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, continue to algorithmically recommend and promote the same content, the same beefs, the same diss tracks, the same posthumous releases. The platforms are not named in these lawsuits, but they are the infrastructure through which all of the monetization flows. Every stream of a diss track that escalated a real-world beef, every play of a posthumous album released weeks after a murder, every autoplay of a grief video. The platforms collect their percentage on all of it, and they bear none of the moral or legal responsibility for what the content represents. This is the system, this is how it works, and it keeps working because enough money moves through it to keep everyone who has the power to change it too comfortable to want to. Here is what really happened in Chicago, stated plainly. The South Side produced a generation of young black men who were genuinely brilliant, not despite where they came from, because of where they came from. They understood technology before the tech industry understood them. They understood virality before marketing consultants were charging 6 figures to explain the concept. They understood authenticity before every corporation in the country was paying agencies to manufacture it. They took real pain, generational poverty, gang violence, absent institutions, traumatized communities, and they turned it into art that resonated with millions of people all over the world. That is not an accident. That is genius. That is the specific kind of genius that grows in the hardest soil. And the people who collected the most money from that genius were the people who took the least risk, carried none of the trauma, and answered for none of the consequences. The A&R executive who signed a 17-year-old on an FBI watch list, who knew about the bounty on his head, who wrote a letter to the judge on his probation case, that executive is now a CEO. He gave interviews about the signing as though it was an act of bravery, as though finding commercial value in a teenager's danger was some kind of visionary act rather than a transaction. He is doing fine. He goes to award shows. He sits on panels at industry conferences and talks about discovering talent. He does not talk about the FBI watch list. He does not talk about the $50,000 bounty. He does not talk about what it means that the most commercially compelling thing about a 16-year-old child, in the eyes of a billion-dollar corporation, was how likely he was to get killed. Nobody in those conference rooms asked him about that, because everyone in those conference rooms made money off the same playbook. The silence is collective. The complicity is shared. The corporations that signed, distributed, and promoted artists who were actively engaged in the gang conflicts their music documented. Corporations that, according to a federal lawsuit, knew about murder conspiracies and bounties and chose to keep collecting their percentages anyway. Those corporations are still the largest music companies on the planet. They are still posting revenue. They are still signing artists. They are still doing the same thing. The label executives who structured 360 deals that financially incentivized young men to stay dangerous, who built in contractual exit ramps that protected the label while leaving the artist with all the downside risk, who released posthumous albums weeks after a murder, who took out insurance policies on artists they had every reason to believe might get shot. Those executives are still employed. They still attend industry events. They are still collecting their salaries. None of them have been charged with anything. None of them have been publicly held to account in any meaningful way. Think about what that means for the next generation. Right now, somewhere on the south side of Chicago, on the west side of Atlanta, in Flatbush, Brooklyn, there is a 16-year-old with a phone and a gift and a pain that the rest of the world wants to consume. He is going to post a video. It is going to get views. And somewhere in a glass office building far away from his neighborhood, someone in a tailored suit is going to open a laptop, look at those numbers, and start calculating what that kid is worth. Not what he could become. What he is worth right now, today, in his current condition. Dangerous, authentic, street-connected, and completely unprotected. That calculation has been run on the south side of Chicago for 15 years straight. It has never stopped. It has never been interrupted by accountability. It has never been interrupted by consequence. It just keeps running. The south side got the funerals, the machine got the streams, and the machine is still running. It found new cities after Chicago, Atlanta, Brooklyn, Baltimore. It found new genres after drill, the whole extended family of trap and melodic rap and street pop. It found new artists, younger every year, more traumatized every cycle, more willing to blur the line between rap and reality because that's what the algorithm rewards. And it will keep running as long as the money flows, as long as the corporate abstraction holds, as long as the legal infrastructure that was designed to protect corporations is stronger than the legal infrastructure that was designed to protect people. The FBG Duck lawsuit might change something, or it might not. The music industry has survived lawsuits before, but what it cannot survive, what nothing can survive indefinitely, is the truth being told loudly enough, long enough, by enough people who refuse to let the machine's noise drown it out. Lupe Fiasco said people are dancing on graves, for real. But here's the thing about graves. Eventually, somebody stops dancing and starts asking how we got here. Who dug this? Who decided this was acceptable? Who signed the contracts and cashed the checks and made the decisions that put these young men in the ground? Those are the bosses nobody talks about. Now you know who they are. Now you know what they did, for real.